In episode 24, titled Variance Behavior, Homoskedasticity versus Heteroskedasticity and Why It Matters, the goal is to diagnose changing variance so you do not draw misleading regression conclusions, because DataX scenarios often describe models that look fine on average but fail in specific ranges. Variance behavior is about how spread changes, and spread is what determines how confident you should be about predictions, comparisons, and reported uncertainty. Many evaluation metrics compress performance into a single number, but variance behavior reveals whether that number is hiding regions where the model is unreliable. The exam rewards you when you recognize patterns like widening errors at higher values or instability over time, because those patterns imply that standard assumptions used for inference and intervals may no longer be trustworthy. This episode will define the key terms, show how to spot the cues in residual thinking, and connect the idea to practical mitigations like transformations and weighting. The aim is to make variance behavior feel like a professional diagnostic habit rather than a statistical afterthought. When you can identify whether variance is constant or changing and explain why it matters, you will choose better answers in regression and evaluation questions. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to the DataX books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Homoskedasticity means constant variance across predicted values, meaning the residual spread is roughly the same no matter whether the model predicts low values or high values. In a homoskedastic situation, errors are not systematically larger in one region of the prediction range than another, and residuals scatter around zero with a relatively uniform thickness. This matters because many standard regression inference tools assume that the error variance is constant, which supports stable standard errors and reliable confidence intervals for parameters. The exam may describe a model whose errors appear evenly distributed across ranges, and in such a case, the homoskedastic assumption is plausible. Homoskedasticity does not mean the model is perfect. It means that uncertainty is consistent across the range and not obviously tied to magnitude. When this assumption holds, summary measures and interval estimates are more likely to behave as expected under standard regression frameworks. DataX rewards recognizing homoskedasticity because it signals when standard methods are on firmer ground. Heteroskedasticity is the opposite pattern, where variance changes with level or time, meaning the spread of residuals grows or shrinks depending on the predicted value or on another factor such as time. In practical terms, a model might be fairly accurate at low predicted values, but increasingly noisy at high predicted values. Or it might be unstable during certain periods and stable during others. The exam often hints at this through language about performance degrading at higher volumes, larger customers, or more expensive transactions, which can create error behavior that scales with magnitude. Heteroskedasticity matters because it changes the meaning of typical error, since typical error is not typical everywhere, and a single root mean squared error can hide these differences. It also matters for inference, because methods that assume constant variance can misestimate uncertainty when variance is changing. DataX rewards learners who recognize heteroskedasticity as a condition that affects both prediction reliability and how confidently you can interpret coefficients or effects. One of the most recognizable cues is a fan-shaped residual pattern, where residuals are tightly clustered for small predicted values and then spread out as predicted values increase, creating a widening funnel. This shape indicates that error variance increases with the level of prediction, which is a classic heteroskedasticity signal. The exam might describe this without showing a plot by saying that predictions are consistently more variable at higher values, or that large outcomes are harder to predict accurately. Another variant is the reverse fan, where residuals shrink as predictions increase, which can happen when there is a floor effect or when measurement precision improves in certain ranges. The key is that the residual spread is not uniform, which means your certainty changes depending on where you are in the prediction range. DataX questions often reward recognizing that this is not random noise, but a pattern that has implications for modeling and reporting. When you can translate fan-shaped into variance changes with level, you are reading the diagnostic signal correctly. Heteroskedasticity breaks standard error reliability because standard errors in many regression frameworks assume constant error variance, and when that assumption fails, the estimated uncertainty around coefficients can be wrong. If standard errors are underestimated, you can become overconfident about relationships, declaring effects significant or stable when they are actually uncertain. If standard errors are overestimated, you can become overly cautious, missing real relationships, or underestimating useful signals. The exam may not ask you to compute standard errors, but it can ask what problem arises, or why inference might be misleading and unreliable standard errors is often the correct concept. This is especially important in business contexts where stakeholders want confident statements about drivers and impacts, because heteroskedasticity can make those statements less trustworthy in some ranges. It also affects confidence intervals and prediction intervals, which are built from variance assumptions and can be miscalibrated when variance changes. DataX rewards understanding this because it connects a diagnostic pattern to a real decision risk: false confidence in conclusions. Transformations are a common way to stabilize variance in many scenarios, especially when the spread of errors grows with the magnitude of the outcome. A log transformation of the target or certain predictors can compress large values and often makes variability more uniform across ranges, which can reduce heteroskedasticity. This approach also aligns with many real-world processes where multiplicative effects dominate, meaning proportional errors matter more than absolute errors. The exam may describe performance where variance increases with price, size, volume, or time, and in such cases, a transformation can be a defensible mitigation. Transformations do not fix the world, but they can create a modeling scale where constant variance is a better approximation, which supports more reliable inference and more stable evaluation. DataX rewards recognizing transformations as a tool because it shows you can adapt the modeling approach to the data behavior rather than forcing assumptions. When you see errors grow with magnitude, a variance stabilizing transformation should come to mind. When variance differs predictably, weighted least squares is another mitigation because it explicitly accounts for changing variance by giving different weights to observations. Weighted least squares is useful when you can model or estimate how error variance changes, such as when larger values have higher variance and you want the regression to reflect that structure. By weighting observations inversely to their variance, you can reduce the influence of highly variable points and improve the reliability of coefficient estimates and standard errors under the weighting model. The exam does not typically require implementation detail, but it may ask what approach is appropriate when heteroskedasticity is present and variance changes in a consistent way. Weighted least squares is a principled answer in that context because it acknowledges heteroskedasticity rather than pretending it is absent. The important point is that weighting is not arbitrary. It must be justified by a variance pattern and applied consistently. DataX rewards awareness of weighted least squares because it demonstrates method selection grounded in variance behavior. Variance shifts are common in performance and pricing data, which is why the exam often uses those contexts for heteroskedasticity cues. In pricing, higher-priced items can have more variable demand, returns, or customer behavior, producing larger error spread at higher values. In performance data, high load conditions can produce more variable latency and error rates, creating a widening spread as utilization increases. The exam may describe that predictions are stable for small customers but unpredictable for large customers, or that the model behaves well at low traffic but poorly at peak traffic, and those are variance pattern hints. In these scenarios, the best answer often involves recognizing that uncertainty is not uniform and that evaluation should consider range-specific behavior. This might influence how you report results, how you set prediction intervals, and how you design operational thresholds. DataX rewards spotting these patterns because it shows you can connect a real business context to a statistical diagnostic without needing a plot. More data does not automatically fix variance structure issues, and the exam expects you to avoid assuming that volume cures heteroskedasticity. Additional data can help you estimate the variance pattern more clearly, but it does not make the pattern go away if the underlying process truly has changing variability. If the error variance increases with magnitude due to the nature of the process, collecting more observations will simply confirm that reality more precisely. This matters because a common bad recommendation is collect more data when the correct response is change the model scale, adjust methods, or use appropriate intervals. The exam may present a scenario where variance changes are structural, such as high variability under high load, and the correct mitigation involves modeling and reporting adjustments rather than simple volume increases. DataX rewards this distinction because it reflects mature understanding of what data can and cannot fix. When you treat heteroskedasticity as a property of the process, you choose responses that address the process rather than hoping randomness disappears. Heteroskedasticity also connects directly to prediction interval width differences because prediction intervals should reflect uncertainty at the specific level of prediction. If variance increases with magnitude, prediction intervals should be wider for larger predicted values because you are less certain there. If variance is lower in certain ranges, prediction intervals can be narrower, reflecting greater certainty. The exam may ask why uncertainty differs across ranges, or what you should communicate about prediction reliability, and the correct reasoning often involves heteroskedasticity. This is operationally important because stakeholders often assume that a model is equally reliable everywhere, which can lead to poor decisions when the model is actually less reliable in high-impact cases. Prediction intervals that vary by range are a way to communicate that reality honestly. DataX rewards answers that connect variance behavior to interval behavior because it shows you understand uncertainty as a function, not a constant. When you recognize heteroskedasticity, you should naturally expect changing interval widths. Communicating the impact of heteroskedasticity is a professional skill because it means explaining that confidence changes across ranges, not evenly. A clear way to say this is that the model is more reliable in some regions and less reliable in others, and that decisions should account for that difference. For example, you might say that predictions for typical cases are stable, but predictions for extreme high values carry much larger uncertainty and should be treated with caution. This kind of communication supports better governance because it prevents stakeholders from treating the model's outputs as equally precise everywhere. The exam may ask what limitation to highlight or how to present results responsibly, and acknowledging changing confidence is often part of the best answer. This also links to fairness and risk, because if uncertainty is higher for certain groups or segments, decisions based on predictions could have uneven reliability impacts. DataX rewards this communication mindset because it reflects real-world accountability. Variance behavior also ties to model choice and evaluation fairness because some models handle heteroskedasticity better than others, and evaluation should consider whether errors are acceptable across the ranges that matter. If heteroskedasticity is severe, models that assume constant variance may produce misleading inferences, while models that allow variance to vary or that focus on quantiles can provide a better fit to the decision. Evaluation fairness here means that you do not declare success based on average error if the model fails badly in high-impact regions or for important segments. The exam may describe a model that performs well overall but poorly for large transactions or peak loads, and the correct response is often to address that range-specific weakness rather than celebrating the average. This is consistent with the DataX theme of aligning metrics and methods with operational consequences, not with convenience. When you treat heteroskedasticity as a signal that one-size evaluation is risky, you choose answers that push toward range-aware validation and reporting. DataX rewards this because it reflects responsible deployment thinking. A reliable anchor is that changing spread means changing certainty, so you adjust methods, because it ties the diagnostic to the practical response. If residual spread changes with predicted level or time, you should not pretend that uncertainty is uniform, and you should not trust standard errors that assume uniformity without adjustment. Adjusting methods can mean transforming the target, using weighted approaches, using robust standard errors, or choosing models that better capture the variance structure. It also means adjusting communication, such as reporting that predictions are less certain in high-value ranges and that intervals should widen accordingly. Under exam pressure, this anchor helps you move from "I see changing variance" to "I know what that breaks and what to do about it." It also keeps you from giving the naive answer that more data will solve everything, because it reminds you that the structure of uncertainty is part of the process. DataX rewards this anchor-driven reasoning because it is consistent and operationally grounded. To conclude Episode 24, identify the variance type and then choose one mitigation step, because that is exactly the kind of best next step reasoning the exam tests. If the scenario implies constant spread across predictions, name homoskedasticity and note that standard inference assumptions are more plausible. If the scenario implies spread that grows or shrinks with level or shifts over time, name heteroskedasticity and state why it matters, focusing on unreliable standard errors and changing prediction confidence. Then choose one mitigation that fits the scenario, such as a variance stabilizing transformation when spread grows with magnitude, or weighted least squares when variance differences are predictable and can be modeled. Finally, state how you would communicate the impact, emphasizing that confidence varies across ranges and that intervals should reflect that variability. If you can do that smoothly, you will handle DataX questions about variance behavior with calm, correct judgment, and defensible method choices. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.